What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. We are going to be talking about interesting things that happen around Alex K. Chen. Alex, thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Yeah.
Really appreciate having you again. Alex and I first met, what was the group called again?
Intelligent Crazy People.
Intelligent Crazy People is the group. And who's the starter of that?
Joshua Van Tard.
Joshua Van Tard. Shout out to Joshua because that group's very interesting. Intelligent Crazy People. There's a lot of smart people in that group. We were blessed to be introduced to Alex, and then we interviewed you as episode number 86, I think, in Boston. And that was a lot of fun.
It was Somerville.
Yeah, it was Somerville,
Yeah.
which is in the Boston.
That's where I was born also, in Somerville.
Shout out to the
Vargas.
Boston area. Lots of smart people in Boston. Boston's like the East Coast Silicon Valley to me.
It was.
Wait, it was? Past tense?
It still is, kind of, depending on how you define it.
Okay. So I love the conversation with Alex, and we're going to dive into these interesting things that happen around Alex. We have a lot of really good topics. Alex is the number one question asker on Quora, over 50,000 questions asked, and even still today, you're posting questions, tons of questions onto Facebook and asking people about their thoughts on things. And it's been awesome to see what people are answering to these really awesome questions that you ask. Okay, so we have a list of things that we want to talk about. So I want to ask you about being a generalist versus being a specialist. All right, what do you think?
There are many pressures towards specialization simply because specialists are easy to train. Generalists are often generalists in their own unique and special way, which makes it harder for them to converge on similar things. So maybe they may converge on similar important points. I think being a generalist requires it's like less guidance, and also the types of things that you're a generalist over are not exactly well defined. A lot of generalists might start off by reading, say, Britannica or the encyclopedias, but even those encyclopedias are very biased in their coverage of topics over the coverage of what's important, which is why people often tend to neglect, say, topics that are of considerable importance to daily life. And sometimes you notice that even the smartest people are really good at just optimizing and knowing what's really important in the day-to-day life and interactions, which includes social media.
Yes.
Social media is totally the venue where encyclopedias suck at, and where, say, a good generalist should have knowledge over. But the generalists of the past, even people like Freeman Dyson, do not have much knowledge over social media, or at least important parts of social media. Now, for someone to be a good generalist, we have to realize that our time in the universe is just so freaking short that we have to focus in on what's locally relevant to ourselves, and also locally relevant to ourselves. What I label as of a recurring relevance. Basically, themes that are continually relevant to us all the time. For example, a lot of human interaction stuff. It's like the entire growth of the internet is something it's also something where people's knowledge is it's just very hard to cover in traditional encyclopedias like Wikipedia. And oftentimes people can overlearn the drama that occurs behind them, but it's still important to have taste in which scenes of these are important. For example, a lot of people say that I'm good at knowing lots of people, and even though it's not the best metric of things to know, it's at least sometimes a more robust metric when you're lost, and when sometimes certain people, especially, say, Teal Fellows, seem to create bubbles of interestingness around themselves at a faster rate than, say, others, traditional, more well-defined venues of knowledge creation. It seems like, let's see here, another thing about knowledge and knowledge representation is, I know some people are trying to represent knowledge as graphs these days, or nodes, or or also times like what's on people's heads, and also like knowledge that one is likely, procedural knowledge that is likely, one is likely to remember over time, and maybe knowledge that sticks on and one might forget over time. And also, it's important to note that pursuing knowledge for the sake of knowledge is not always the best pursuit. You also have to have in mind some idea of how one can put the knowledge in use, but sometimes it's I noticed that, especially in the Bay Area, how a lot of people are good at figuring out when to learn only when it's needed, and then know when to properly garbage collect or forget it when it's not. Sometimes people have, even really smart people don't have the best memory. They just forget it almost as quickly as they learn it, but they at least have the intelligence to know when to forget. The problem with school, of course, is it front loads all the learning in the very beginning, and that's where a lot of people tend to forget much of it, though some people tend to not forget as much. They can create the illusion of progress. So a lot of people I talk with also like Romeo Stevens, they question themselves, what exactly does it mean to maintain progress, to actually have progress over time? I think a lot of people have an illusion of a continued trajectory of progress, when in reality, a lot of them are actually losing relevance over time. I think for some people, the most important problem is the problem of staying relevant. If you do not stay relevant, then you are basically going to become noise when you're older years, and this is why we have the loneliness epidemic. And so one of the problems I'm most interested in is basically figuring out how to properly know what to know in order to stay relevant, so that one can be properly insulated against the loneliness epidemic. That's the low bar, and the higher bar is just to shape the world in the way you want to. Basically, as Joseph Filio once tweeted, or from Mark Andreessen, if you really know what you want to do, the world and execute it well, the world shapes itself around you more so than you can think. Though, in order to do that, you need to have proper epistemics and feedback loops, because you do not want to have magical thinking or delusions, and you have to very, very quickly have feedback loops of where you're over optimizing in the wrong way, or over learning in the wrong direction, which a lot of people are prone to doing, especially if they are prone to valuing themselves based on how much they know.
Amazing stream of consciousness. Okay, so the child is born, and there is only a certain amount of neural real estate.
Yeah.
And
it shrinks over time.
And if the ability to parse information, if we don't have a very high signal to noise parsing ability, we can become irrelevant.
Yeah. A lot of people are overtaken by what Romeo Stevens calls babblers. Oftentimes it's drama, or they don't know how to think for themselves. They're overly swayed by others, and because they're scared of disappointing other people, when they don't even model other people as, sometimes people might get a little bit locally upset that, say, you didn't reply to their email, but over the long run, in general, it doesn't matter that much, as long as you did not cross the threshold of royally pissing them off in a memorable way. Oftentimes, when you interact with some of the highest output people, what you notice with them is that they have hundreds of emails per day, and oftentimes they're not necessarily responsive. Though, if you know them well enough, you know how to reach out to them. If during times that you really, really need to reach out to them, and oftentimes, how do you get to know these super high effective people? Oftentimes, the only solution is to basically grow up with them. This is still why, people who attend elite schools like Stanford still often gain an early advantage in life, because they catch on to outstanding people when they're young and in the formative years, and have access to the entire output history of these people in the formative early years. A lot of times with older people, what happens with older people is that they still have knowledge, but they don't remember how they learned it, and they like have abstractions, but sometimes their abstractions are learned in an idiosyncratic way, and when they lose the input history of the idiosyncratic way in which they learned it, it's almost like a foreign language to new people. So then even after the fluid intelligence is declined, it seems like they're super smart because their abstractions are still impossible for other people to understand. Mm-hmm. But they've kind of become non-neuroplastic, output-only machines. Mm-hmm. Should we put it that way?
Okay, let's hit this. I found what you said really fascinating about when you grow up with someone, you know the collection of their stories.
You know, basically. Also, it's like this. A lot of really effective people, like super smart people, they learn at the rate, they learn and do things at what's fastest rate for them, but explaining how they got to the process takes time away from continually doing. This is why they're not the best explainer. For example, one person called Parney, and she divides people into 3 categories called nerd, philosopher, and resourceful. I would add empath there, but that's another story. But
what was the last one you
I would add empath, but that's another story.
Empath.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or a coordinator. Or basically.
Okay. And what are the differences?
So nerds are basically like people like Dosh or Nick Camarada, who basically, or Kevin Kwok, who basically like learn shitloads and they do things in their own way. Sometimes they aren't necessarily the best in school. Oftentimes hackers and tinkerers and creative engineers, they like to do things their own ways and process input and output in their own ways, in idiosyncratic ways, and output in ways that that aren't the most parsable to other people. They aren't oftentimes they don't have huge motivation to parse it in the same language as in the language understanding for other people. But on the other hand, if you grew up with them or lived with them in their formative earlier influence growing up, you have an idea of what made them become what they are, and even if you don't pick up on everything they do, you pick up on enough of it to get a sense of why they are, say, so freaking effective at being massive output machines.
Okay. Something that you said earlier, you were making this interesting distinction between a specialist and a generalist, but specifically with a specialist.
Oh yeah, specialists are often the nerds.
Yes, and here's something, because you were breaking down those categories, I thought this was maybe an interesting way to relate to it. A specialist is easier to train, so we're spending more time with training people to become specialists. But with
some people are self-made specialists too.
And then with generalists, you said sometimes people just start with
schools often do train people to be generalists by teaching everything. Also, this is a distinction that is more complicated than it looks, and I'll have you parse it down later. Sometimes schools, especially with people who try to implicitly encourage people to learn everything by learning all the subjects, and it kind of turns off a lot of these nerds I've mentioned who just want to become viciously good at what they want to be viciously good at. And because time is so limited, we should not prevent the nerds from recognizing that they're really good at being what they're good at, because as long as they are really good at and they interface with super good generalists, the generalists will have an idea of how to properly and to feed into these specialists, so that these specialists can continue being awesome.
Okay, so let's talk about the organization of knowledge, because we were talking about
organizing knowledge is organizing in ways that specialists can parse super well and when they want to.
So there's this limited amount of time that we have to live. There's this limited amount of neural real estate. How do you figure out, now it's different for every person right? Every person's born
figure out what you're ridiculously good at.
What you're ridiculously good at.
And what other people are not so good at.
Okay, so expand on that a little bit more.
Because in the future, everyone says that the future is like where uniqueness matters more and where you want to be non-replaceable. That's how to stay relevant in the long run, though of course you also want people to understand you well enough so that they can interface with you. But if you are super unique anyways, it's just hard for people to mimic you anyways. But the point is, let's see, how to stay relevant. For my part, for example, I am a generalist, and I just noticed that almost no one else is a generalist in the same way that I am.
I'm a generalist too,
Yeah.
but probably in different ways.
Yeah,
How would you
yeah.
classify yourself as a generalist?
For example, I know the internet really well. I grew up on the internet. I also grew up with conflicting desires over whether or not the internet was like wasted time, over whether school was wasted time. Of course, ultimately, there's this comment on Facebook that Chao Chu Ran posted, and then someone replied about say extracurricular activities being more useful in school, or someone mentioned that, and then I just said that all the time I wasted on the internet was more useful in school, and now I see why I said it the other way. I said, of course, a software developer named Buck loved the comment to that.
The wasted time you
Yes.
spent on the
Yes,
internet was
quote-unquote
more
wasted.
important than school.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes. And because I'm like,
But
so
didn't you
super
learn
curious.
language and math and science and history
No,
through?
just look at unschooled people. A lot of unschooled people like this. There are a lot of unschooled people now who actually basically learned everything, even self-motivated, without learning from school. I don't know about what percent of the population can actually be unschooled themselves. I mean, I grew up reading encyclopedias and almanacs for fun, so I'm the type of person who is totally fine, I think is most likely to thrive in an unschooled environment. It's possible that there are other people who just need to be taught in order to.
But how did you learn to read?
I forgot, but I did not think of school. I just read encyclopedias and medical journals for fun, and also the internet. I grew up on the internet as well, and growing up on the internet just exposes you to so much material that you can just read for fun, and you just pick up so many ways to communicate through that, anyways, and oftentimes in more organic ways. Oftentimes, I also grew up on online forums, and they're oftentimes in more organic, less polished ways. You have more of the context behind them. And it's important to have context in order to communicate in proper ways. A lot of academics tend to communicate in ways where all context is removed. And then what happens is that you have, let's say, a lot of papers where all context is removed, and oftentimes people just hate reading all the stacks and stacks of papers. Though of course, academic reviews that summarize things are still great.
Okay, so then every person has a different way that they will find what they love doing, and that they will find how to maximize the way that they parse information to get the most relevant information,
to just get the most out of their
stay
lives.
the most relevant in the hierarchy of people.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So then now, how does persistent influence work within this?
So persistent influence, so I know a lot of people are influencers, like some people in the media or pop celebrities or stuff, and they might, for example, they might attract attention because they produce content that people want to see, or that produce content that makes people feel good to themselves. Oftentimes, themes that produce large amounts of page views fall off over time. I mean, I was there to watch much of Quora's history. I've seen many Quora power users, and I've seen a lot of them have influence metrics that seem to degrade over time, even though their follower counts are still high. It just seems like less people. It just seems that their viewership counts decrease a little bit over time. Oftentimes, because they produce content that's locally relevant to the time. For example, even a lot of tabloid journalism, or a lot of people accuse that accuse Gawker or people even accuse say the New Yorker of being overly sensationalist because so that's why good people like Brian Kaplan don't even read the news, and I do think that. That if you have a large enough network, that people just give the news to you, especially in the Bay Area. Of course, it's still good to it's still good to I still grew up reading the newspaper, and I think I learned a lot about the world by reading the news, and I think it was good. But after a certain point, you get enough intuition for how it works that you can basically figure out also how to curate it towards you and more in a way that captures more of what's important to you and more relevant, timeless.
And there's a big difference between seeing a video show up on your news feed about a specific company that's maybe doing something like 3D printing organs versus knowing the CEO of the company that's 3D printing organs. How do we figure out how to connect us into the sphere of influencers?
Knowing the CEO could, so knowing knowing about 3D printing, fundamental technology, I think knowing fundamental technology is often more times like more important, more timeless. But on the other hand, there's also chances are that someone else is probably better at this than you. Knowing the CEO of it, it's more of like a lottery ticket, or not it's more like dartboard. Oftentimes you just burn out, as most startups tend to fail, and oftentimes people tend to
but it's up to us then to identify the ones that are going to be there for the long run and try and surround ourselves with those people.
Yeah, and also times the ones who are there for the long run, it's good to be close to them early on.
Yep.
And because if you only know them later on,
that kind of brings us back to the point of the younger that you know someone, the more you know about all the inputs and outputs that have went into their life. Can persistent influence also have to do with the way that we reach out to people that are very high up on the hierarchy, that are inspirational to us, that we want to be persistent with?
People who write books, for example, do they have persistent influence? Like, sometimes, even if people read books less and less these days, what happens is people who do write books, they are read by some groups of people who create YouTube channels, and eventually their influence is read by people who create YouTube channels like anti-readers like Sarah Perry, and then somehow presented out to a younger Gen Z people who just parse it out in their own way.
Yep. You're fascinated with knowledge.
Yeah.
And would you say that every day that you wake up, your sort of arrangement of arranged, your day arrangement is to maximize knowledge input?
It is, and I also have to recognize the extent to which I have to realize that sometimes I cannot learn everything, and I will.
Does that frustrate you?
Yes, it does frustrate me.
It frustrates me too. Yeah. So then that feeling of not being able to know everything, what do you do with it?
For example, people have noticed that I seem to be more people-focused these days. And in fact, a lot of people over the past few years, they see me as primarily people-focused. And it's actually not that I was always people-focused. I was originally more knowledge for its own sake focused, but then it turned to people. And because when you know people in the Boston Bay, you also notice people who are just super who are interested, and you also notice that sometimes they're more effective with their lives than you are locally at the moment. And then from that you figure out how you can be better at, say, influencing people in the long run. Now you're only one person, and oftentimes people generalists oftentimes do need to have an idea of how people input-output knowledge or parse knowledge in order to be the most effective generalists. And you have to basically know how the media works and know how people's input and output cycles works, which sometimes good writers, especially those who write abstract math textbooks, don't exactly actually recognize, especially if they like to be understood by their own quote-unquote elite group, whereas sometimes you can actually explain it in so many ways that can make it accessible to a much wider range of people.
So for someone's earliest formative years, what do you recommend?
Okay, so it depends on person. I don't know to what extent every child is curious. I'm not sure what percent of the population is amazing at unschooling themselves, but I recently met Harshita Aurora yesterday, and she's an unschooler, and I was so freaking amazed at how aggressive she is.
And when you talk about unschool, explain to people, does that mean a little bit of school? Does that mean some high school? Does that mean college? What does that mean?
K-12 is beyond toxic and should be destroyed. I think college is okay.
What should be destroyed?
K-12, K through kindergarten through 12th grade. So unpack, that's a very powerful thought. So just unpack, why do you think that?
Because it's very inflexible. It doesn't allow people to learn what they're best at. It's also very it assumes that also in America, the teachers just aren't as smart as people. But anyways, it's just like people aren't just, I think, there's a passage in Encyclopedia Britannica that's one of my favorite quotes that just say that people just underestimate how much people can really learn really fast. Yes, like Harshita. freaking amazing. And I think so the problem of progress, which you can see on the Twitters of people like Patrick Collision-Lind, Laura Deming, and Joseph Filio, is people are worried about scientific progress slowing down. And I think the best way to basically speed up scientific progress when there's just more and more to learn is to just figure out how to make sure how specialists can corral themselves into this knowledge and just do what they're really viciously good at, and then just make them awesome. And then, but also figure out how they can communicate the result. Even if they work as fast as possible, make them communicate themselves in a way that's reachable to other people. Like I know this super smart guy from Olin, Dosh, who recently graduated from YC Startup, and he is super fast, but also not the best at explaining things, and not the most patient at explaining things, even though he's creating a startup that's trying to explain how to automate synthetic biology to biologists. So how to do this? You're basically, we're going to have to automate his explaining things to biologists in a way that does not slow him down at what he's best at. For example, the problem with academia is that we assume that professors, the best doers, are good at explaining things when they might not necessarily be. So you just have to capture the doers at doing what they're best at, just capture as much of what they can doing at the time, and then figure out someone who's good at explaining say, the trail they leave behind for others or role followers to replicate or mimic.
Okay, so that's really good. Okay, so K through 12 being completely abolished, totally. Okay, yeah.
Sure, maybe restructured, because what it's doing right now is just teaching young people to be obedient workers and not critical thinkers, and they're not.
Yeah, people love to have a sense of control, and they don't like to lose a sense of control. They like their employees to be unpredictable, apparently, it seems.
Okay, so we take the K through 12 system and we abolish it completely. What do we have then for 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds? What sort of system then do we just let them go on the internet and just think that they're going to just go and find whatever interests them, and that's kind of the process that we think they'll best learn from?
I'm not sure if that's actually that much of a bad thing. The main problem is they may be attracted to super stimuli. For example, drama, gossip, video games, addictive TV, especially since a lot of people like World of Warcraft seem to be or Zynga seem to be gamifying addiction, though it's also interesting that World of Warcraft and Zynga also seem to be decreasing influence over time. Like, they're not as popular as they used to be. So what exactly is addiction? It's probably related to social, because people are validation seekers. And often, and I think we should also just touch on the fact that you said that college, though, is totally fine to keep, because there's a couple reasons, I think, maybe, and tell me if I'm right here. First of all is the professors that are there are actually really world-class. Yeah, they are really good. Also, you do gather a huge amount of smart people into those clusters, and interesting things happen in these clusters of smart people.
Yeah, and then also it's kind of the proper, once by the time you're 14 or 16 or 18 when you can enter this college, let's say, then you will have already done a pretty good amount of identifying what you care about. Then you can go into that sort of group
like
of other
Harshita,
people.
for example, Harshita Aroa, she changed her mind about going to college. Like, even though she's unschooling herself and right now and being fucking amazing at just executing on projects, and figuring out what she's just viciously good at.
Shout out to Harshita, by the way. She's your friend that you and Matt Rastovac, who we've also had on the show, have recommended us to have on the show, and we are now coordinating to have her on the show. She's currently programming the ability to wear an EEG over your head and be able to think the way that a drone flies, and think fly left, she's making this herself.
That is something that no one teaches about, even though it's like the most important problem, because...
And she's teaching herself how to do this process.
Yeah, a lot of people are teaching themselves how to do it, and of course, because people are still validation seekers, we also have a lot of babblers who are also trying to think about it, trying to make themselves seem better than they actually are. It's important to develop a system that discourages people from being babblers, but without discourages them to aggressively ask questions and admit where they're weak or wrong, and maybe figure out and also give them feedback about whether or not they're approaching the scene in the right direction, because not everyone is equally good at every scene. And for my part, I try to learn everything at first, and even though I am a speedy learner, what I'm really good at, I originally learned the wrong topics, which wasn't the fastest at learning, even though I just learned the internet and a lot of at super fast rates, and also biology of aging as well at a super fast rate.
Okay, let's talk about risk taking and comfort zones.
Yeah.
Are you typically on the thought of just shattering through uncomfortability and just being as uncomfortable as possible?
Oftentimes what's uncomfortable to people is different to every person. Sometimes what is risk taking just going out of your comfort zone, because sometimes people prefer to be in the comfort zone all the time, and sometimes risk taking just means breaking a habit, even just doing something that's slightly uncomfortable, even though it might not objectively might not even be a risk, but maybe cognitively it's perceived as a risk, and it's just measured in the brain as a risk anyways. I know also a topic of coordination problem. I know some people, like some good people, like Martin Nowak, are interested in the problem of coordination because I think right now we do have issues with coordination problems because people often don't trust themselves over other people, and maybe when people don't make everything known, maybe when people's preferences change over time, maybe people still, I think school also encourages self-interest because they all make people want to go into games their own highest GPA, but sometimes if you optimize for happiness, sometimes you realize that sometimes it is...
Thank you, Ronnie. That's our 15-minute timer.
Okay. So if you optimize for happiness, sometimes you realize that happiness is oftentimes through making the other people around you most effective. So the problem, of course, is that school pairs you up with a bunch of people who you're not necessarily the best fit with, and sometimes making them the happiest is not exactly the thing that makes you the happiest. Figuring out who makes you happiest is a long coordination game of making sure you pair up with people you are most long-term value aligned with, and know who the long-term preference list. Like, this is why I think the TU Fellowship was such one of the most important things to happen in the last 10 years by far, because it just created a totally different incentive structure, prestige structure, and
a push for unschooling.
Yes, exactly.
It's flipping the normal system on its head. Yes.
And if you are like and also coordination problems is something the rationality community deals a lot with. People often say that trying to get rationalists into a coordination problem is like herding cats, perhaps because rationalists tend to be, people often describe rationalists as high openness, low conscientiousness, because sometimes they are addicted to like Wikipedia tab explosions. Sometimes a lot of rationalists were also emotion traumatized by school because they're good enough at it to do well, but then something happens and made that screws them over afterwards, and then they don't know what to do, so then they still continue with objective knowledge of objective function of trying to maximize knowledge, even though they're not even sure where it leads them. And there are good things with knowing the right things to learn, but on the other hand, you really don't need to learn all of world history in order to be the most effective person for your goals, whatever your long-term goals are, which may be eudaimonia for many people in the long run.
Can coordination problems also be around everything from trying to figure out how to build a company for like five people, but also coordinating how to work together as a planet?
For example, a lot of people I know, do you ever, for example, one of the things that I find interesting is why, for example, MIT and Harvard students tend to go to grad school at lower rates than, say, students from liberal arts colleges or UChicago or Caltech or Reed. And sometimes people think liberal arts colleges like to advertise themselves as being good on that front, but a lot of times grad students don't have the best life outcomes after college, and it could be there are many people who debate over whether or not it's good or bad. I do believe in general that it's good to have more knowledge workers, and we should have more funding and support for science. But on the other hand, we need more supports. We just really need better support structures. For example, Lord Deming's Twitter seems to capture much of the zeitgeist of what's wrong, what's important, what's wrong with the world today, and one important tweet she tweeted out was, academia is, Google autocomplete for academia is, and there's suggestions like, academia is killing my friends, academic is dead, academia is broken. And it seems like there's like a consent problem within academia where people consent to become graduate students without exactly knowledge of what entails them and what their real objective functions are afterwards, especially because they grew up on the validation function that being a better student produces better results in general.
Yeah. Okay, how about we talk a bit about rationality on the way out? You sent me this Center for Applied Rationality. There's this amazing group of people that you were just hanging out with. And so why are you so passionate about rationality?
I know many of the best people and distance themselves from rationality because of the types of people it attracts, so therefore they label themselves post-rationalists. But I still think rationality in general is, it's a generally good thing to practice as long as you embrace core tenets. For example, the tenets of rationality. Such other tenets such as you should avoid magical thinking, you should always seek out harsh truths earlier rather than later. You should also you should also be prepared to reconfigure your value function around more of what you are and things you can't change rather than things you cannot change. And another thing is that a lot of times people but in terms of believing what's possible and what isn't possible, a lot of people really do not believe what's possible. For example, there's this one person who's become a legend in Stanford called Parnian. She's from Iran, and she has surprised everyone. She originally was non-technical, but she somehow, through interacting with a huge shitload of really smart people, is leading the Shannon Labs project, which it basically raised funds from unknown people to basically, so this is the thing, I've noticed that a lot of people are raising new funding. For example, Laura Demi is also raising Pioneer Fund and for identifying young promising people. And then another person, and then even though I also noticed that Leverage has attracted a lot of funding from people like Thiel in order to figure out how to maximize the extreme right end. And the extreme right end might be a collection of personalities. Now, one thing, people oftentimes associate success with G, and one thing with people on the extreme right end is that they're oftentimes cognitively uneven.
What do you mean cognitively uneven?
Cognitively uneven means that they're visually good at some things, but they're not as good as other people. You often observe this in people who win international math Olympiads, or people
great at math but not great at social skills, or something.
There's a longer story behind this. Amy Harmon may write a book about this later, but it's not just like social skills. It's just because they spend so much time over preparing for the contest that they become better at preparing for the contest, but then they lose life experience, other types of life experience of noticing growing up.
Okay, Alex, I want to make sure that we target this because this is something that we talked about and I thought was really important. You have now told me that what do you think is now the most beautiful thing in the world? I thought this was really important to share.
Originally, the connections, all the connections and information, neurons and synapses and synaptic boutons and pairwise interaxonal distance, interaxonal boutonal distance between people, and microtubular arrangement of people's neurons that produce memory and basically produce a person's input output a person's knowledge of everything they're just exposed to. It's just so amazing, and you can access this in so many ways, and it's just so beautiful, and it's just. For example, there are certain people with a type of aesthetic who are just attracted to just what's wonderful and what's amazing in the world, and then maybe they just have a strong aesthetic, and if they know what they remember really well, it's just intense what they can basically teach other people. Yeah.
Okay, then the sort of most beautiful thing is the way that when a mind is birthed into the world just absorbs inputs and how that mind forms over time, over years.
The developmental history.
The development of history.
The developmental history.
Developmental history of a mind as well as of all minds as well?
So most beautiful scene, there are many definitions of scene. I think just of particular minds, especially the minds of people who have particularly strong aesthetic and who are not prevented from exploring and who are just left so free and who just have such strong drive to just continue being amazing and unconstrained.
I think I'm very blessed, and I think we're very blessed to know you and your insatiable appetite for knowledge. I love this.
It was just so targeted at the beginning, and I just wish that future minds would not be so mistargeted.
Yeah. Okay. Have you thought more about simulation?
Simulation.
Yeah. What is your take on not only simulation theory, but also just in general, kind of what knowledge that can give us thinking about it?
Simulation theory, so I know there are ways to simulate converting visual representations of one scene to representation to another scene. What about thought representations, given environment, entire input history? I don't know. We can create, there are so many people who create simulations of simple systems, like climate systems. And the question is, and often people like Dyson question not whether or not they actually produce results that are, for example, that are actually, say legitimate enough. But the problem, and sometimes limits can use insight. They can give new mental models in which people can operate, and it's not because people sometimes learn better through mental models, or because often what you can create simulations of unexpected behavior. So insight is basically, for example, insight is various ways of cause and effect that could be of recurring relevance, that can basically. But the problem is that sometimes people overattach to simulations, especially if they're not the most curious or open-minded, in which case they may be overattached to simulations. And I think simulations are totally reasonable to use as long as you constantly hedge them.
And do you think that this is base reality, or that you are playing a role-playing game right now?
Oh God, the world is so weird.
What do you think is the weirdest thing about the world?
Everything.
I hear that.
You made me melt a little.
This world makes no sense. Collectively, anyway.
Damn, that feeling. Such a strange place.
The world is so beautiful, that's all. I just don't want it to die.
You're a beautiful person, Alex.
How do you balance the beauty of the world with the weirdness of the world?
The weirdness is part of the beauty in a way, but who knows? It's so sensitive, and
I use drugs to
be careful.
Thank you. I know.
We must have the confidence to know to have our own confidence and proper, say, knowledge representation that epistemics to not mess it up in favor of some stupid objective function that relies on feeling that one is better than other people, which is basically the objective function that a lot of people still rely on. And I think a lot of people can rely on objective functions that transcend it all.
Yeah, to transcend the feeling that people are better than other people.
You have to be better than others to feel good about yourself.
Yeah. And you're right, it's such a delicate place that it can easily just go.
Yeah.
Alex, wow.
And also feeling of control over power, and we also have to we have to redefine what control and power really mean. A lot of people hold on to the idea that they need habits and control. Feel like they need to continually be in control over other people in order for their world to still remain the same, or for things to evolve in the way they want to, when in reality they don't necessarily need to be in control all the time or in the ways they want to, but it still needs coordinate. We still need to figure out the coordination problem in a way that is explainable to other people in a way that they ideally want it to be explained.
We are so grateful to have had this conversation with you, Alex. I want to mention how insanely interesting it was that you reminded me a lot of the debate days, because you were speaking at a very quick pace, which enabled you to get out a lot of information in a little bit of time that we had on the show. And I think that's very interesting because sometimes people will speak slow or medium pace, but you went really fast, which was able to just get out a tremendous amount of information.
You can also, any readers, watchers can just 0.5x the speed.
Yeah, for anybody that thought that Alex was speaking quite quickly, you can definitely 0.75% the speed, 3/4 the speed of the video. Or if you thought he was speaking too slowly, you can.
Also, knowing smart people well and knowing what they need can also allow you to be like an ideal personal assistant to them, even if you're not necessarily on their level. Just know that, just know where, and then they will value, and then you will basically mirror and adopt many of their super effective habits, even if you're not necessarily the smartest person yourself.
Yes, and this is a frequent thing of the people that come onto our program is that we know nothing about neuroscience, but we'll have someone that does study neuroscience their whole life. So we'll try and provide them with some sort of value, and they'll be like, "Oh, thank you! Like I didn't know about that or this," and then we'll slowly take into our being more of what they know about neuroscience, and it gives us a better general understanding of that and more. All right, Alex, this has been such a pleasure. Getting to know you better and getting to know about these interesting things that happen around you. And we talked about so many interesting things: generalist, specialist, organization of knowledge, persistent influence, rationality, coordination problems, comfort zones. It was super fun. I still find it fascinating that you want to overhaul the whole K-12 system. I think that we can figure out a much better way to school and
It is the most
mind.
important problem because the youngest minds are the most neuroplastic. They have the highest level of intelligence, and they often have the highest energy levels. Energy levels decrease just as fluid intelligence does. And we're presented with a myth that the most effective people are in their 40s, but in reality, that's an artifact of just how long we're training people. For example, look at Michael Newsom's Twitter about how NIH grants are reaching older people. It's just the way power and authority just works, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It's only because even though one thing with a lot of the smart people, that a lot of the smart people aren't even the most self-aware. And I notice this because I know a lot of people who know people students at top universities who notice that they're not necessarily the most self-aware, but but sometimes you can trigger them to value their own self-awareness more and more.
So much love for what you care about. Thank you very much for coming onto the show again, Alex. Such a pleasure to have you. I'm really looking forward to the next episode together, whether you're in the Bay Area or we come out to Boston. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, looking forward to to talking to you more about what we're writing about and working about relating to time and neural infrastructure, because I think there's a lot of interesting collabs there. Much love, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you guys had a good time, check out Alex's work below. Also, give us a comment. Let us know your thoughts. Let's have some conversation in the community about all these topics we discussed. You guys know, don't just consume this content, go create with it, go and make videos, go make blogs, go start companies, go do shit with this. Also, subscribe, join the family, join us on Patreon, help support us so we can go and scale this content and go and impact more people with it and fill sports stadiums. Much love, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to our team, Ron, Mark, Alfredo. Much love, everyone. Peace.
Yeah.